Hey there, Doctor. Greetings.
Hello, everyone. It looks like I have a big enough screen so I can see everyone, so that's great. But this is where I actually hand it off. This is going to be terrific for me. So now I can go get coffee, have my 5 o'clock, whatever. You can call on me when you need some insights, but you've heard from me all day, so I think it's high time that I transition this over to you, Rich, and let you keep the audience engaged, and I look forward to participating on the panel, and I'll come in at the tail end for a wrap-up of the day. Okay, so it's over to you.
Right on. Thank you very much. So, welcome to Deep Diving into Clinical Monitoring within the realm of Decentralized and Virtual Trials. We have a really good panel here today to go over, to talk about, exactly what has happened in clinical research here in the past 12 months, right? And exactly how these professionals have dealt with it. So first, I'd like to do a brief introduction with our panel, right? And so if we could just get you guys to introduce yourselves. And so, Farah, can you start?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you, Rich. So my name is Farah Ahmad. Hopefully everyone can hear me and see me okay. I'm based in Montreal, and I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Strategicon Pharma with the Clinical Maestro product suite. I have about 20 years of experience in the industry. Kind of prior to Strategicon, I spent most of my time on the CRO side, doing kind of BD leadership roles in various different CROs, but mostly at Syneos and the predecessors of Syneos Health on the inventive health side, mostly focusing on early development. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you. Mary, can you introduce yourself? And Mary, you're on mute.
I did that on purpose. Are you ready to hear from me? Okay. I'm Mary Birmingham. I work for Janssen Scientific Affairs. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Just an introduction?
Yeah.
Richard?
Very good. Taylor.
Hi, I'm Taylor Crush. I work in global patient recruitment and retention for Takeda. I've spent the last 10 years of my career specifically focused in the PR and art space, spending a lot of time on the agency side. And previous to that, I worked at the site level. So I'm excited to be here and have this conversation today.
Right on. Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Hoffman. I'm currently at Apellis. I joined late November, but I'm in medical affairs, hematology. But before that, I worked a lot in clinical development, so I've had to deal with a lot of this. And I originally came from a CRO, so I have lots of varied experience. So thank you.
Right on. David.
Hi, David Jackson, trained physician in internal medicine. I've worked in many roles in the clinical development ecosystem. I've been at the investigator side as a PI, sub-I. My current role is a senior medical director in neurology with neurodegenerative disease. And I've been focused mainly on CNS and rare diseases probably for the last 7 years or so.
Right on. Thank you. And Abid. Abid, can you hear me?
Looks like he's frozen there, Rich.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
No, but I hope it's better. My name is Abid. Los Angeles. Technology startup on Google Glass prototypes for frontline physicians and surgeons as a way to productivity for especially in ORs. And now I'm the VP of Medical Affairs for a very unique therapy for. I was a chief regulatory officer, NG approval for the clinical trial. So now I'm to be in this panel forward to learning from all you cool food.
All right. So, Abid, unfortunately, if the bandwidth doesn't improve, we'll probably let you go because we only heard about 1/3 of those words, and I think you had a lot to say, but we couldn't really hear it all that well. So you got a few minutes to kind of deal with your bandwidth, and we'll see how it comes out when we get to you on the questions. Okay. I think that's the only way we can deal with that.
I'm trying my best. Log off and log on.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you go out and we'll see how you come back on. Maybe that'll help.
Sure.
Okay. Well, other than that, we are ready to go. So here's our introduction. Clinical monitoring within the realm of decentralized and virtual trials. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we conduct business. Clinical research has had to adapt to an environment where subjects may not be willing to visit a clinical site or a monitor may not be willing to visit the site in person. This has required clinics to visit subjects at their homes or remotely. It has forced monitors to review site operations and source data remotely. Today's discussion will involve professionals throughout the clinical research process and how they have had to alter the way they work to accommodate COVID and the decentralized clinical trial. Right on. So with that, poll questions, and I'm wondering, do we have? Is our poll ready here? I don't know. I don't know if we're actually going to be able to accommodate these poll questions. But why don't you folks think about these, and then we think about these questions, and then what we'll do is we'll return to these at the end of the study when we go through Q&A. Okay. So has COVID impacted your ability to conduct your clinical trials? Have you adopted new software procedures to support the monitoring of decentralized trials? Will you continue to use decentralized methods in a post-COVID world? Okay, so for our initial questions for Mary, David, and maybe Abid, if he's able to get on, is what are the key lessons learned people need to know to help them maximize their study success during COVID? Mary.
Well, for us, we found that with COVID going on, that a lot of our sites activation and our site recruitment was not as we anticipated, and mainly due to COVID studies getting precedence, and also staff being assigned to COVID studies or being assigned elsewhere. So you have to, it's like we had to figure out either a way to get approval faster or to have more try to get more sites. That was difficult.
Boy, Mary, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Figure out those happen.
Yeah, we're breaking up. We're just not getting a lot from you right now, Mary. I don't know how to deal with this.
Really?
Yeah. How about if you because you came in real well when we were practicing, so let's try it again, and if we can't hear you, then we'll maybe you can try the ab heat method and see if you can get out and get back in with a better connection.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? You can?
Yes.
Okay, so basically what I was saying is during COVID, we had difficulty with recruiting and getting sites activated. It took a lot longer than we anticipated, and mainly because the resources weren't there and COVID trials were prioritized. And so we had to figure out a way, we still have to figure out a way to make sure we're able, when we're going to start a study, we can get the sites activated and get the sites on board. If there's a different way to get through the IRB, et cetera. So that was our difficulty.
Okay, so I've got a good follow-up question for you for later. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
David.
Yes.
What do you think? What are the lessons learned people need to know?
Well, I listened to Mary's keynote earlier. I mean, it mimics very similar to what we experience. And the lesson learned is to really build out your entire study design earlier. Your timelines have changed. Mentally, we have this timeline in our head when we go to design, those timelines have changed tremendously. You need to do it early enough that you can engage. If you're working with a CRO that has ability to expand into decentralized trials, you got to be able to have the infrastructure for it. You got to be able to have the communication with the IRB early enough. I would even recommend a centralized IRB if you're doing decentralized with patients across the country, across the globe. So it was quite a bit of lessons that we've learned through that process. And then, being in rare disease, it was an opportunity for our patients to be at home. When you have Alzheimer's patients, it was, when you go to a site, that's an artificial environment from a patient. And so the data will show, hopefully the data will show out that being at home for some of these patients that have caregivers, that the response and their compliance has increased. So we're seeing data that suggests that, but we have to bear that out.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, Abhit, good luck.
Try to read. Is it freezing still? Better now.
Maybe you can try with just your audio.
Yeah, I would try just the audio.
Is it any better now, Farah or David? Is it?
Yes. Yes.
Much better.
Yeah, I just had a Zoom call an hour ago
Yes.
with my company, and it went really well. So I know the Wi-Fi is not an issue at my end, but maybe this platform floor has some teething, buggy issues because it's fairly new, I'd imagine. But anyways, thank you for your patience, folks. I don't know how much you heard me earlier, but I'm currently the VP of Medical Affairs for this company called Intramune Therapeutics, which is based out of Manhattan, New York City, and working on a first-in-human toothpaste-based desensitization paradigm for peanut allergies, which are a very high unmet patient need across the States and Europe, where it's more widely prevalent than the rest of the world. So the clinical trial for phase 1B safety is ongoing in Belleville, New Jersey, as we speak, and we're trying to show a lot of safety data. So then there might be an expansion for efficacy as well as a continuation into phase 2A. I spearheaded as the chief regulatory officer the FDA IND submission. We got greenlit 2 months ago, and yes, so now the clinical trial is ongoing. I used to be the chief medical officer in the past as an MD and an MBA in healthcare for a Los Angeles-based medical technology company working on a Google Glass, smart glass prototype for frontline physicians and surgeons. We like to call it hands-free productivity for hands-on work, especially in operating rooms for surgeons. And now I'm the VP of Medical Affairs for Intramune. So it's lovely to meet all you folks. It's a pretty robust panel. Really looking forward to learning from each and every one of you. Was the question on the agenda what I thought I learned to maximize our study's success during COVID, Richard? Is that right?
I think I understood you, but I'm having a hard time. So I think from what I was able to piece together is that yes, you've answered the question.
No.
Actually, I
but,
can hear him.
yeah, I mean, yeah. So yeah, you go ahead and just kill it. I don't think we're able to hear you very well. So.
Actually, we heard him, Richard.
Oh, I heard him very well.
We heard him fine.
Oh, is it,
Yes, we heard him.
okay, so everyone heard him but me?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what.
But he didn't answer the question. He didn't answer the question.
Yeah.
Okay, what we're gonna have to do is that I'm gonna need some help moderating this because it turns out that I'm the one with the issue. Okay, so Len, let's go over. So, did we get a good answer out of Abid?
No, he didn't answer the question.
He gave like a
no, I was just waiting for you to see if you were able to hear me okay, Richard.
Yep.
And I apologize
yeah,
if you weren't able to hear me for some reason. But maybe it's a headset issue. Maybe it's LA, LA is not, people don't, all people don't love Los Angeles. Yeah. So it's a geo issue where I'm based out of. So sorry.
Just answer the question. Let's do that.
Thank you. Obviously been challenging for all of us with pharma and biotech, especially at the intersection with CROs, because they've been grappling with patient recruitment, maintenance of patients on different clinical trials. There's been an understandable fear, Dr. Rosenberg would attest to it, of catching COVID in a clinical site. It's for a layman, not for us physicians, but for a layman, sure, I don't begrudge them that. I hope that with a little more widespread vaccination now, that things will kind of ease up a bit and we'll get a little more beefing up of clinical trials. But what we did was, as is the theme of the conversation, we definitely enhanced the mHealth, EPRO, patient-reported outcomes facet, where patients can use the toothpaste at home and then report back with teleconsults, with apps on how if there are any localized adverse drug reactions like erythema, hives, gingivitis, because ours is a toothpaste-based approach, looking for that oral cavity ADR, or God forbid any systemic side effects. But typically, so the first take has been on site and to monitor patients, keeping an EpiPen handy. But if they have taken that well, it's a fairly safe assumption that they can continue on that same dose for the toothpaste with peanut allergens admixed at home. And patients typically have EpiPens handy at home. And definitely when we need to up titrate and escalate them to the next higher dose, we need for them to come back to where we have to do intake of a peanut to monitor their biomarkers. We have to monitor their immunoglobulin E and G with a blood draw, and we have to do that in person. I know they're mobile phlebotomists, but this definitely is FDA mandated that oral food challenges need to be done on site. So I think it's a hybrid model between sites and mHealth. For the phase 2, we'll have power toothbrushes, which will have Wi-Fi embedded into it, and those will synergize with the power toothbrush. Augment.
Okay.
But I hope, if not all.
So you thought being a host was tough, huh? Or easy, I should say, huh? Being a chairperson. Welcome to my world, Rich.
Welcome to my pain.
Maybe you didn't even hear that, so that's even worse. Luckily we have
Okay, I think Abid's done. Okay, so let's go on over to our next question for Kate and Monica. How have you altered operations to react to remote monitoring? Kate.
To be honest, since I changed jobs mid-COVID, this is not the first time I have had to deal with remote monitoring, because I know that FDA has been really in favor of making sponsor companies and CROs try to prioritize that. So in a way, I feel like COVID kind of helped it along, which is unfortunate. But I mean, I think there's a lot of good things that did come out of COVID that are things around the way we work, and being able to embrace new technologies and new ways of doing things, which I think probably will be a good thing in the end. You have to get all the bad things that came out of COVID, but as long as we can see some of the positives. So I myself hadn't had to do that because I haven't been in clinical development in the second half, but I was in a company that was doing sort of digital therapeutics, and that also got, I think, a real boost from the COVID experience, because it was sort of things that we weren't really ready for, maybe scientifically, or our experience wasn't in those areas, and I think all of those areas really got a boost during the COVID experience. I know that wasn't exactly an answer, but that was kind of that was the closest I could come to an answer there. But I know FDA has been really trying to get remote monitoring kind of to be the standard. So I think it moved things along.
Thank you. Okay, and so question for Farah. What tools have you used to support remote monitoring?
Thanks, Rich. So here at Strategicon, we're our tool. Can you hear me? Yes?
I'm the one that's having difficulty, so just go on and
everyone else can hear me.
Keep in mind, everybody, that Farah actually represents Clinical Maestro. So this is going to be, how they've used their product. And please explain what the product is, Farah.
Yes.
And how they've changed their product suite to support remote monitoring. Okay.
Right. So I don't know if we've really changed the suite, but we've identified different use cases for it. So Clinical Maestro is a clinical business operations SaaS platform that is end-to-end for kind of study planning, scenario analysis, and budgeting, outsourcing, and accruals and forecasting. So kind of all those processes that the business processes that support a clinical trial. And what we've really seen during the COVID pandemic has been an interest in our what-if scenario modeling. And I think this has particularly strong application in the idea of kind of remote monitoring and actually looking at various scenarios and kind of including that into your planning. I think David mentioned how it is so important to kind of almost plan in ahead of time, more so than kind of in a typical trial. Because of all the logistics associated to decentralized and virtual trials. So what we've seen from our customer base is really that interest in the what-if scenario planning, enabling them to do very quickly, within maybe 30 minutes, actually model a number of different scenarios, and looking at, the returns and kind of the increasing returns of more and more remote approaches. So they're able to see the impact on the budget, they're able to see the impact on the timelines, and actually model all those additional services like nursing agencies and telehealth, as well as the additional logistics around decentralized trials, model different scenarios on percentages of remote monitoring. So that's really been helpful in getting to those views of kind of the best approach and the best return of the approach that is being evaluated. Kind of really understanding how does this impact the timeline and the budget of the study. And in speaking with a number of other kind of technology players that are more focused in on kind of data management and key clinical data points, really we've learned that not all data is created equally, as we all know. And with all the I guess the pressure on the timelines, particularly for the COVID trials, what we've seen is that really there has been a focus on kind of really keying in on those data points that are going to support the outcomes of the trial, and just being smarter about what data to focus in on, and kind of understanding how different technology solutions can help you kind of zero in and ensure that you can you can move forward at the pace that is required with all this complexity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Len, same question over to you. What tools have you used?
Great. So, hi everyone again, and Farah, nice to see you again. I know we've chatted before. So, some of you may know that I work for LLS, and we set up an environment to conduct complex oncology blood cancer trials using the Maestro trial environment. And we had 5 years ago deployed a lot of the technologies that people have now scrambled to put in place because of the pandemic. So our philosophy from the outset was that a monitor really shouldn't need to visit a site, that all the information concerning investigator site files and so forth should be available to us as a sponsor, and that ultimately information surrounding institutional drug pharmacies, I'm talking about ones that are, academic institutions, could be available remotely through looking in. And so from that perspective, we set up software that allows us to electronically upload all the academic medical record information using a system called Protocol First. And what it did was allow us to upload the data entry medical record corresponding points. So in other words, you have Epic, you have Cerner, you have all these medical records, right? They're typically not available remotely, but we had uploaded all the key information. The study coordinator would upload it to our environment, and we'd have a split screen and be able to see the medical record information and then allow the central monitoring of that information, especially in clinical trials or complex clinical trials. So when the pandemic hit, we weren't going to the sites anyway very much. So it always allowed us to continue, looking at the status of our clinical trial using that tool. We subsequently moved on to actually take an automatic connection to our data collection environment using the tool called Clinical Pipe now, where a lot of the structured data sets flow automatically into the data collection environment, whether it's RAVE or whether it's another one. And so again, from the ability to look at the information as it flows in essentially near real time, we have those conduits already, and we've had them for quite a while. So they were purpose-built, not for a pandemic where everyone was rushing to find out about these tools. We actually had worked with the vendors to create these tools to allow us to continue to grow with that going forward. So yes.
Kevin, so question, did the vendors give you, did you have to get permission to get the data you wanted, or was it going into like some of those databases are very, finicky sometimes that they don't want you poking around in there, right? So how did you go about getting to that level?
It's a great question, and we started this 5 years ago. And basically, what we asked these big academic centers was, look, with the proper gating put in place, right? These academic centers allow information to be transferred over to other users. For example, you send your labs out, you send your medical records out, you send pharmacy information out, you send, x-ray information, on and on and on. Why can't you send clinical trial information that's identified, not de-identified, and it's in the consent form that we do this, and it's gated. should you be able to do it? Well, it took us about a year, but we figured it out, and all the sites actually came on board. And it didn't take a pandemic to say this is allowed to look at remotely. So we now have these systems and these data flowing, and it's just a normal part of what they do at these large academic institutions that are working with us. So it didn't happen overnight, but once they realized that they do it for all these other reasons, there's no reason that you can't do it in clinical trials, obviously, and that gives us the view in. So I know some institutions allow monitor views, but we didn't even want that. We wanted something where the coordinator said, this is the source. This is the piece of data from the medical record, and this is what I'm uploading into your environment, because a lot of times the monitors still have to look for this information, and we didn't even want to figure it out. And it's got an audit trail because they selected it, they uploaded it, and you can visualize it, or you can see it automatically being transferred. So that's a long-winded way of saying that this system is up and running and does work in complex clinical trials.
Awesome.
And I have a bunch of other ones too. In fact, Mary, one of the things that might be of interest to you is that we're now starting to use patches or biostickers that actually provide 30 days worth of continuous data that you put on the left chest wall, and that feeds into our clinical trial environment as well. So there's no more Fitbits, there's no more watches, there's no more things that in reality standardize more of the data collection. When it comes time to things like the vital signs, but also sleep and walk and physical activity and all the other things that go on. So the sectors have moved quite rapidly, and we have been keeping up with them and actively, or actually proactively, incorporating them into the trials that we're running. But I don't want to dominate this. I'm going to send this back to Rich. If you have other questions, please ask. But happy to weigh in as appropriate as we continue with the panel.
Okay, thank you. And for our final, actually Ryan's not here, so we'll go over to Taylor. And Taylor, will you continue to use tools that support patient participation in decentralized trials in a post-COVID era?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I share the sentiment of course, my colleagues here, but everyone in the industry when I say that COVID accelerated the need for us to explore different tools and platforms, et cetera, that can help us plan and implement decentralized trials. But it's certainly been long overdue, especially from the patient engagement standpoint, because what this has allowed us to do as an industry is give patients an option to fit their life into a clinical trial instead of fitting their life into one. It's given them, more options, and it's made it easier, and hopefully it's starting to reduce the patient burden too. So, at Takeda, at least we've made a pretty big investment in working with and understanding what strategic partners are out there and selecting a few to partner with us to provide these services and be clinical platforms so that we can plan and implement these hybrid or fully decentralized clinical trials for the benefit of the patient. And I think it's one of those things that it's a fine line, right? Because you want to make participation as easy as possible, and the tools that have come about because of COVID have certainly done that. But from a patient perspective, you also want to make sure that we're maintaining that long-term engagement with patients, and that as we move into this more virtual world, that we don't start to lose those relationships with patients and transcend into something that becomes more transactional. I can tell you from years of experience of working at the site and working in patient recruitment and patient engagement, one of the biggest reasons patients participate in clinical trials is because they like that connection with the site and with the study coordinator, and to have the ability to build that relationship. And for some patients too, it gives them an extra sense of security when they're taking an investigational product, because they know that the frequency of care is going to be more, and it's also going to be high touch versus what they would receive as standard of care. So I think that those points too are important to consider. And us as industry leaders, I think we need to keep that in mind and kind of challenge ourselves to think about that and how we can continue to engage patients in innovative ways as we progress into this more, virtual and digital world, which is, what COVID has sort of brought about.
Well, thank you very much. So I was going through and coming up with some interesting questions, but then my ability to hear was degraded. So, audience, I'm going to need your help. Okay, so I've got a question for Mary, right? But audience, if you've got any questions for this group, can you please submit them through Q&A right now, and then I'll parse them out to the team members here. But we'll start with Mary. So Mary, you were really quick at the beginning. Can you tell us about some of the ways that you worked with IRB and so you said it was different, but how? Can you explain how was it different, and what did you do differently in order to facilitate, decentralized trial? Did you use e-consent? Did you use some doc management system? What did you do?
So basically, we did use a central IRB, which was very helpful. So, and the sites were all fine with using that as well. They just had to get their approval. But I think so the question is how did we make this happen, and what things helped us to get to do this? I think it was, give me a minute to think. I think central IRB helped. We had e-consenting. Everything was decentralized. So there was absolutely no patient visits. So I think having, and reaching out to the patients, the physicians reaching out to the patients with an email, and then they went to our website and we had a very nice video and an explanation of what they'd be doing, and then they were able to opt in. The problem was I think we actually needed more ways to reach out to the patient than just that email. People preferred text, you get spam, and then they didn't know who it was from. So we actually went to a multi-pronged approach to get to these patients, and then also having the sites actually go to their clinics. If people were coming into clinic after people started coming back in for heart failure visits, and actually doing some face-to-face. So it became very multifactorial. But I think people were excited, and I said we started this before COVID, and it kicked off because there were no site visits. It was already planned that way. It wasn't that we had to. It was just getting through the sites COVID scare and not having staff were working at home. They didn't know how to do things remotely. We got pushed back on some of the. Even getting contracts was difficult because they were kind of prioritizing the COVID studies. But then after a couple of months, that died down. So then we were able to pick back up and pick up some more sites. So that was helpful. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, now, I'm going to need help, panelists, okay, because once again, I had a hard time hearing anyone but Mary. Go figure. Okay, so with that, we haven't gotten any questions from the audience yet. So, are there any hanging questions that you had for other panelists? Mary?
I have one. So we had all of our data was patient reported, or sorry, I can't ask now because my dogs are working. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So we had all of our data was just directly from the patient. We didn't really have any source documents to verify. So when you're verifying source documents, you said how do you do that? So do you, I know Len is getting all the data to him, but if you don't have that capability, how are you getting the documents? Or are you able to view their medical records? Is that more of a norm now than it was before? I don't know if you can answer that, or anybody. Tell me what you're actually sourcing anymore, or how you're doing it.
Mary,
I take that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say that I've had to do that, and sometimes you can't source data verify everything, right. But sometimes you can get markers for source data verification, so you know that the patient has had a visit on a given date, so that you can double check the date. Where you don't have the exact data for some of the fields, you have to sort of do what you can.
Okay.
So go ahead, whoever that was that also sort of answered.
Mary, it's Taylor. So I've done this kind of the old school way back when I was a site coordinator, where we would send source documents to monitors to be verified. Of course, it's source docs, so they're all de-identified, which is not the easiest way, and it's problematic because it's very time consuming for everybody involved. But what I have learned recently in sort of my exploration into other partners and vendors that can help facilitate decentralized clinical trials is that there's multiple platforms now that are out there that sort of allow for this real-time data entry, and it's shareable so that the sponsor can have insight into it, the CRO and the CRAs can have insight to it, and it also follows Alcoa, so it's all attributable, it's date and time stamped, and it you can leverage it anything from just typical visits that are conducted via telehealth, and the PI or the study coordinator who's ever conducting the visit via telehealth can document as they go, or if it's ePro forms or eCOA or things like that, it's all documentable within the platform and accessible for monitors and sponsors alike. So it's pretty efficient.
Right. So it seems like our remote monitoring is more monitoring the data in real time to look for things that don't make sense, right? And going back and asking for corrections, like if you didn't put in the date or it didn't make sense the date you put in, or you didn't answer all the questions. So it seems to be more real timing of just making sure the patients are doing what they're supposed to be doing if they're data entering. Thank you.
Sure. Can I ask one thing, Rich? I wanted to ask Taylor. So if you're collecting it in the modality that you just mentioned, how does it make its way back to the medical record itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it's one that we've posed too as a sponsor back to the vendors as we're going through and looking to see who's going to be the best partner to sort of fit this mold. What I've seen it in a couple ways that this becomes the source. This platform becomes the source so that you're not putting secondhand data back into, what would then be considered secondary source because you're, scribing it somewhere else after the visit is or the data has already been collected. The other way that I've seen it is it's sort of a hybrid model, and and when you do it as the hybrid model, it doesn't really address, Mary's point, which was how do you monitor it in real time? Because if you can only use this platform to monitor some things, but not all things, then you're still stuck with that question of how do we monitor the things that are still written, in the medical record on, at the site in real time in this COVID type of world where people can't go on site.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you some practical ways that you may want to consider it. So you collect a wealth of information, but when you really think about it, especially in oncology and probably in other areas, your responders, the response data set is really what you need to focus on. And then, of course, the ease of special interest or, significant safety issues. If you really aim to focus on those, then you make the site burden, if you will, focus on those particular attributes. It'll be a lot easier than telling them for every patient, you need to go ahead and collect every piece of data. The days of sending queries for every missing data entry field are just voluminous and of no value. So if you kind of give them the ground rules and give them the priorities from the outset, you might be able to take that hybrid approach, but really have them focus on the areas that are going to impact whether the drug is something that you want to advance or not. And I see that a lot of companies don't take the time to figure that out. They kind of just have that usual approach. And I think if you would take a step back and think about what I just mentioned, you might have a little bit easier time respecting the site and the fact that they're resource depleted, right? Because a lot of them don't have the staffing levels anyway. So that if you're going to focus on something and you need that to make a decision in near real time, that would be a better way to approach using it, approach the problem.
And also, when we're developing the studies, we should be actually only getting the data we need. We get so much data we don't even need that, and then we want it verified, and it just propels the whole thing.
Yeah, we did that 5 years ago already. We just basically said all these things like, in very pragmatic terms, do you need your oncology history for the, since you were diagnosed, or do you really need it for the last few months?
Yeah.
And all these things about relationships to study drug, whether it's possibly related on a Thursday afternoon or, it's probably related on a Tuesday afternoon. The way they ask a lot of these standardized questions is just doesn't lend itself to, drug development and getting, the answers that we need. So of course that should be understood by now, but it's unfortunate that it took a pandemic to, create, realistic or pragmatic ways of collecting information. But Rich, I don't want to, I could go on with the chair stuff. I want to make sure you're hearing things and take the conversation to wherever you'd like to.
So actually, things just miraculously cleared up for me. I can't explain it, but I think that you said something there, Len. That's really important, right? Is that you don't have to do 100% source verification, right? You need to ensure that that endpoints are captured and endpoints are checked, right? If I understood correctly, and so it's like why weren't we doing this all along, right? And is it why weren't 100% source verification? Why? And I think that we're starting to learn about data that matters and how to check data that matters. Has anybody adopted this philosophy, here in the last 12 months?
Well, we've been doing it for 5 years, so I don't think I'm the right person to ask. But
right on. Okay.
My understanding is that was a big part of Pfizer's strategy to bring the COVID vaccine as fast as they did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and don't discount the fact that you have disparate data sources, so you can get hints, as long as you can quickly look at them collectively and then amalgamate them in some kind of data lake and pull out what you want to see to make the decisions in a near real time environment. Especially when you think about oncology, where you have genomics data and other things, RECIST data that you can see and you can get access to pretty quickly. And you couple that with a lot of the basic information from the CRF as quickly as they happen to fill it out, you're not flying blind. And I think that's one of the keys to making, real-time decisions, and obviously something that was adopted, not so much in oncology in COVID, but the concept is there now to do that.
All right. Well, we still have no questions. So I was wondering, David, what are you, as the medical director, how are you going to approach, your next study? From a practical standpoint, what lessons have you learned today, right? Through this environment, and then what are you practically going to do in order to make your studies more efficient?
Yeah, this is interesting. It's again, I point back to listening to Mary's presentation earlier, and you really you have to build out and what we're doing is building out the entire study flow early enough. Where it's patient engagement, patient ad boards are set up, and we're talking to the patient on what they would like to see, the flexibility in that. And so once you have an understanding of from the CRO, and then selecting CROs that have the ability to either do hybrid or decentralized 100%. So it really depends on your patient population.
Right.
And, some work best from home. And there's always that challenge of what about people who don't have internet access, remote areas. And so, we've talked about more around what's the solution around that. If there's an opportunity to partner with a local internet provider, I mean, the internet service per month is cheap. So if we need to put somebody on a 6-month process to be able to have service, then that's a drop in the bucket compared to what you spend on an overall study. So really talking about more solutions on how we can expand more out. The focus is, especially with rare diseases, when you have caregivers, it's really important if we can offer that opportunity for them to be at home with their caregiver and versus an artificial environment. So our focus is to engage virtual or decentralized trials as possible. And if it's a hybrid opportunity, we'll leverage that. And then the other piece that we were looking at is what Taylor mentioned earlier about patient engagement and making sure that it doesn't we don't lose that connection and to avoid being transactional with the entire process. And there's a company that does a really good job at that. There's several out there, but I know Science 37 worked with them in the past. They have a patient engagement process where it also engages the patient's current physician. You got telehealth. You have the mobile nurses that are engaged with them, and they have the access to, if they need to speak to their own physician, they have access to be able to do that and keep that total engagement. There's polls and questionnaires that come up on the app that allow the patient to respond. So all of those are going to be, I think, part of the larger picture to ensure that you have the patient engagement throughout the trial so you don't have a high fallout rate because they're not engaged, and then also continue to build your knowledge base. We're constantly testing and validating different tools, including the wearables, including different apps. So it's my previous company prior, we started that process of building out what we call an agile lab. So we had a group of people that come together and we test and validate different new technologies to be able to help, again, help pull this forward, because there's data that suggests that you're looking at a 30% cycle time reduction if you're able to really engage fully with this decentralized virtual trial process.
Right on. So I was part of a discussion a month ago, right? And we came to the conclusion that it's very important that once you define your protocol, right, then you start working with your vendors or your CRO to figure out what the best way to accommodate the patients are, right? And I think it's gonna vary, right? I don't think you're gonna know, but what you're gonna have to do is be very flexible. But what I'd like to hear from the panel here is that if we're going to be flexible and we're going to capture data in different ways, okay, like David was describing, does that lead to lack of consistency right? So if we're capturing, let's just say we're going to capture questionnaires, some in a bring your own device and then some in paper because they don't have internet connectivity, right? Do you think that affects the quality of the data? Taylor, what do you think?
It's a great question, and I think it's hard to answer if it affects the quality of the data because you've got to look at it all before you can determine that. But what I think it does do is kind of create extra workload, which leads to higher chance of inconsistency. So if you have to come up with two processes instead of one process for how you're going to collate and evaluate all this data, you're just opening yourself up for, the chance of higher mistakes. So in that sense, yes. But in the other sense, if you're asking the same questions and they're being asked at the same time, they're just doing, you're just using two different sources to collect the information. I don't know that the quality of the response is going to be different, but I think it's going to be more challenging on the back end to collate it all and then make sure that the results are coming through consistent.
Okay. Right on. Abhit, what do you think? Is that an interesting question for you?
I lost the question. I think the question
yes, it was that do you think that there will be data implications if we're going to be flexible in the way we collect it?
Yes. It's a kind of...
Yeah, Rich, if I can help, I don't think I can't hear him. I don't know if you can hear me either.
So I didn't know if it was me because I'm having issues. Right?
Okay. Was everyone else able to hear me? Or was that a common issue for everyone on the panel? Or?
Not that time of it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. So I do feel like there will be things which will be imperative to have an in-person site visit across food allergies, across oncology, protocols to be adhered to by patients, procedures to be. There has religious brushing technique adhered to. So I do feel like data, it'll be impossible to have 100% decentralized data collection just because patient clinical trials run the gamut. Some are more mHealth friendly, some are not as much. So that's my take on that, Rich. Now.
Okay. I hope somebody heard that, and I'll be able to get that in a recording. All right. So now we're approaching the end of our panel. Any lingering questions out there, panel? Anything that you wanted to ask one another? Anything that I failed to capture? All right. Well, thank you. I'm very disappointed that I just wasn't able to hear all of the input because from what I did hear, I learned a lot, but unfortunately, it's about a third of it. So, hopefully, I'll listen to the recording of this and be able to really, understand everything that you said and the inputs that you gave. Barring the difficulties, Len, I'm going to go ahead and give this back to you about 10 minutes early, so that we can break and move forward. Okay. So, panelists, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for preparing. Thank you for your willingness to give an hour of your day and help, all those in attendance and me, understand exactly where the industry is and where it's going. I appreciate the effort. Okay. Everyone, have a great day.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Rich. And I guess I'm the conduit then with the meeting organizers here. So I'll also thank the panel and actually all the presenters throughout the day. I know Sam's going to probably do a recap of what, where we've been and where we are now and what we're going to be doing tomorrow. So again, thank you everyone for attending. And Sam, are you wanting to take it to a conclusion here?
Yep. So I do want to thank everyone for their time, energy, and effort. Rich for organizing this amazing panel. Dr. Len, of course, for you sticking by all day through all the back-to-back presentations. We appreciate you again. And stay tuned for tomorrow. We have, again, an interesting lineup of speakers. We'll be giving Len a break tomorrow. We'll be having Dr. Shaheen, SVP of Click Therapeutics, chair this session tomorrow. Again, back-to-back presentations. Abit will be coming back, giving his talk on proof of concept results in his experience. So do please stick around. We have an exciting day once again tomorrow. You guys can once again network between one another and visit the booths in the meantime. So thank you again, guys.
Right. Thank you, everyone.